This is, and I think I mentioned before, this is every year, or we're studying now for the next, for this time, next time, whatever, is what's read every year on Yom Kippur in the afternoon. The first part of this Torah portion is Yom Kippur in the morning, the Torah reading, then there's this part. And this part deals primarily with laws of sexual immorality. And the idea of Torah is, of course, that there are laws and we have to live holy lives. And holy lives, the idea of lighting Shabbos candles, eating kosher, fasting in Kippur, those are all elements, ingredients in a holy life. But really, what's really where the rubber hits the road, often the litmus test of whether we have a holy attitude to life, is really in how we deal with our natural instincts. So kosher, for example, yes, eating kosher is it is bringing food into myself, that's compatible for my soul, and all of that. There's definitely the holiness to it, but in the holiness is not only in the keeping kosher. It's a primary element of the holiness is the idea of the inner struggle and discipline to rise above our instinct to eat something that's not kosher. If I'm hungry and it looks good and it smells good and it tastes good, it's not easy, and I'm not stealing it. It's not easy to resist. And the idea of rising above that is really very much where the holiness resonates, because holy means that we're different, we're cut above. So yeah, not everyone lights Shabbos candles, but that's not really what we're talking about. It's really in where we're the same, we're different. We all have appetites. We all have natural instincts, and all humanity. And where we discipline our natural instincts to guide them, and sometimes have to transcend them, or override them, for the sake of living a principled and moral life. That's a central point of how Torah presents the idea of leading a moral life, and so the holy life. So most of us don't have an impulse to do all the things we just spoke about. That what we witnessed on what went on last week in Israel. Who enjoys hurting somebody? We don't. It's not like today we say none of us stole, the mauled, killed, raped, pillaged. That's not on our thing. We all have to eat, and we all have a creature comfort part of ourselves and a pleasure seeking part of ourselves, and how we deal with that is really ground zero of our holiness journey, being able to achieve holiness in our lives. So, because sexuality is an important component of the human condition, it's brought up here as a very important element. Now, before we get to it, there are a few things. First of all, let's just take a look at verse 3 before we get into this. It says, "You must not imitate any of the practices of Egypt in this regard." Remember, here it said, "I am God," and now, which in this regard? In the regard of there was a lot of sexual immorality there. Whatever felt good, you did. If it was pederasty, if it was adultery, if it was incest, if it feels good, that was really an arbiter. So the Torah picks two extreme examples of this type of hedonistic immorality that the Jews at the time looked at in the world. One was Egypt, which are the practices of the part of Egypt where you dwelt. You lived there, so there is this societal possibility of societal influence, which are worse than those of Egypt in general. And you must certainly not imitate the practices of Canaan, particularly those parts of Canaan to which I am bringing you, which are worse than those of Canaan in general. For the present population of these locales are in this regard the most debased in the world. So when it comes to sexual immorality, which we're going to talk about, they are coming from one area, which was worse. Even within Egypt, they came from the red light district. They came from the worst district in that regard. And they were going to Canaan, which was also known in the civilized world as really a very debased hedonistic area. In this regard, moreover, you must not even follow social conventions such as attending their dramatic performances or sports events or engaging in a superstitious practice. We'll get to that in a second. First, we'll talk about the sexuality idea. So the Torah, and I didn't make the copy of it, as I mentioned before, but the idea is, it says, God says, I am God. And that's a very important preface to this, because when we're in the throes of an appetite or an impulse or a desire, and it's strong, and desires can be very strong, it's very easy, very difficult to resist. If there is an idea, there's potential punishment, fallout, getting caught, that can sometimes say, it's just not worth it, and just walk away. But it's very difficult to get past the throes of a strong desire. So the idea of God saying, I am God, as a preface to this, is giving us a mindset. So at the end of the day, whatever the desire and the pleasure that's really now within our grasp, whatever it would be, and we really want it, if we can just pause for a second and recognize it's going to be temporary. Food, the sexuality, it's going to be temporary. On the other side of that, I have a life which is well beyond this next 10 minutes or hour or 2 hours of pleasure. And think about, there's God. My soul is immortal. God is immortal. And if God is watching me, and God wants me to ask me to lead a life that is holy, we're being very short-sighted. And it's part of the imagery to help, the protective mental imagery the Torah sets us up with. So God says, I am God. I want you to remember that. And now I'm going to tell you what you shouldn't do. And again, this it's not again, but in the technical Torah perspective, a person, there's no consequences, punishments, whatever, that can be meted out if a person that wasn't warned. There has to be an awareness. So these are, later on, we're going to read about the consequences and repercussions. But here, the God is laying out, the Torah is laying out, this is what I want you to do, this is what I want you not to do. Listen and absorb it. Later on, we'll talk about consequences. But the first thing is, you have to understand what I'm talking about. So what the Torah presents is that there are these debased areas, and you are likely to learn from your surroundings. So I want you to know that I want you to get a grip on your appetites. The Talmud uses a phrase that the righteous people are in control of their emotions. I mean, the control of their impulses. And those who are not righteous, it's that their impulses control them. And that's, I think we can see it, and that's one of the things of growing up for a child. It's the question is, do they have impulse control? Once we're past bar and bas mitzvah, the Torah tells us we have the toolbox to be able to have impulse control, and the ability to guide our appetites and our impulses and our emotional impulses. That is a measuring stick of our own righteousness and sanctity. So, and the language of the Talmud is, they're righteous. They're able to guide their emotions, and which emotions could be hatred too, our love or lust, whatever it may be. So to be able to look with a more detached North Star, to be able to assess, is this a right thing or is it a wrong thing? Are my emotions taking me in the right direction? Because emotions, just purely emotions, are going to be selfish, and just following emotions is never going to end up pretty. because it's all just being self-centered, and acting on self-centeredness it may last for an hour, 2 hours a day, 2 days. Eventually, we end up banging up against a wall. Now, at the end of this piece on page 3, brings something which is a rule from the Torah that we should not follow social conventions of the other of our non-Jewish, or in this case, idolatrous societies. So this is it's actually it's relevant until today. At some level, we all dress in the ways of our societies. To some extent. So I dress more conservatively, but it's within the conventions of society. There are sometimes I'll put on a tie. I don't like ties too much, but because it's social convention, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And that's I've been doing it. It's being respectful to your environment. So there are a few levels of making sure that we're not impacted too much by our society. One is sometimes it creeps into religious services. So, for example, in societies, and we find this in Jewish law over the millennia, if the common Christian, because we live in a Christian land primarily, if the common Christian culture was that everyone wears white by a funeral, and that was the Christian culture, then, because that's not just my community, there's a Christian part of it, then it would really not behoove us to follow that because it's religious. And then in past years, people wore black. And if the common Christian religious culture, non-Jewish religious culture, was to wear black, they would wear something else, because we're not supposed to follow the social conventions which are like which have a religious tinge. One of the reasons that even now, as we're setting up a new shul, one of the things we're careful about until today is that there are in the past few hundred years, as synagogues were built, and so even especially in Germany from the 1800s on, the synagogues were designed in a way because they wanted them to be more palatable to the population and not to be so shtetl minded. Some people designed the synagogues to be more spatially furnishing wise to look more like the church, and that for rabbis at the time and even until today were careful about that, not to do that. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with it. What's inherently wrong with it is that where it comes from, where it's following the conventions of others. And what the Torah wants us to do is to be friendly with others, to be respectful to others, not, God forbid, to criticize them or fight against them, but to maintain our own identity. And part of that is the languages of Chokosei and Losei who do not follow in their conventions. Actually, the idea of wearing a yarmulke is, according to some commentaries, is it seems to be more of a rabbinic convention. According to some commentaries, it became the Jewish way, and therefore it's biblical. That idea of walking bareheaded is following their conventions, the societal conventions, and therefore there's even, and this is found as kind of an authority in code of Jewish law, that the idea of wearing a kippah has even biblical weight behind it, because it's something that's this is how Jews do it, and we don't do it like other people do it. Again, nothing personal to those that don't do it, but to my non-Jewish neighbors. But there's something special of wearing my Jewish uniform. And to some people, the beard will go in the same direction, not exactly that. So there's something to the distinct identity. Now, that there can be seen as a little broader also of what makes us Jewish, or where would I be following non-Jewish traditions. And here what they put is the dramatic performance of sports events. There's nothing wrong with going to sports events in Torah law. I think according to, if not according to everybody, according to most authorities, no one I've seen puts it in over here. But in the times of the Talmud, the sports events were, they were cruel. They're talking about I forgot what it's called again, but fighting with animals, this bloodthirsty sports. Jews shouldn't go. They were told, don't go. That's in the time of the Talmud. Don't go to the Roman circus. There's nothing wrong with going to Barnum and Bailey, but the idea of partaking this, it's if people non-Jewish convention is to go to ShopRite, because that's what it is. There's nothing wrong with going to ShopRite, but there was a kind of a religious or moral tinge to it, and therefore we said, don't do that. In today's day also, Thanksgiving is not a religious holiday. It's not a Christian holiday. So there's really nothing wrong with the Jews celebrating Thanksgiving, period. But the idea of Thanksgiving, really to have it more in a kosher way, aside from having a kosher turkey, is to say that this is a time where we're choosing to thank God for for this country, where we can practice as Jews and so on. But it's not just doing it because that's what everyone else does, because that's what the non-Jewish culture does. And that's really what this verse is trying to say. It's when it comes to statutes, going to ShopRite or whatever, those normal things. You live in a society, you have to follow the rules of society, you have to follow the laws of society. If my society says you have to stop at a red light, the Torah says I have to stop at a red light, and there's nothing wrong with going to ShopRite. But where there becomes more statutes and principles that affect morality and that affect our Jewish identity, Torah says don't go on their way. Be a good neighbor, be a good friend to those who aren't Jewish, but don't allow your Judaism to be diluted. Now, especially what they're saying here is in the societies, and again, the Torah here throws out two more extreme examples of the hedonistic societies, which is that area of Egypt and Canaan. Torah is saying sometimes the pressure is going to be intense, and sometimes there's the winds, the mores of society are going to be ones which don't comport with Torah's idea of morality. And here we're talking about sexual morality. Don't be afraid to stake out your own space. We don't do this. This is not something the way we behave. That if you feel that this is something that violates something, even for non-Jews, in a nice way, you might be able to get into a conversation with your neighbor. But the main thing is first to make sure that we're not getting diluted. Okay, so let's move to verse 4. So, rather, you must perform my ordinances, which are rational commandments, and safeguard my rules, super rational commandments. There are 3 different words that are used for mitzvahs, but it's 3 different categories, which can break down sometimes into 2 categories. One is the mitzvahs which make sense, and even without the Torah, they would make sense to us if we were a person with a moral conscience and logic. Understand, you want to live in society, you want to be a good person. We don't rape and pillage. It's not. We should be aware of God if we have to deal with resisting the urge. But the idea is we shouldn't do that. So there are mitzvahs which make perfect sense. Well, then there are mitzvahs which we would not have thought of on our own, but once you explain it, it makes perfect sense, like making a seder and Pesach. If left to our own devices, would we be getting together in the spring to sit down and have matzah and recount the tale of what happened to our ancestors 3,300 years ago coming out of Egypt? Not necessarily. Once the Torah says to do it, it makes perfect sense. It's not a super rational thing. And then there are super rational. Kosher. There are others which were, it's the Torah says to do it. The Torah says to do it. I can try to find an understanding of it and try to find a lesson from it, but it's not. The Torah doesn't give any reason, and there isn't any natural human reason that comes to mind when we talk about kosher, for example. So here it mentions two. One is the ordinances, and one is my rules, the super rational commandments, which they're calling rules. The Hebrew word for it is chok, chukah, and it's from the same word as engraving. There's when something's, we say it's not etched in stone. What does etched in stone mean? It's immovable. Writing something on a paper is not the same thing as etching in stone. And etching in stone means there's a permanence to it. And the idea of these mitzvahs is the idea of I didn't make them and I can't change them. And I accept them from God. So if a person thinks that, Jews circumcised their sons at 8 days old because that was a health precaution 3,000 years ago. So, okay, my doctor said you don't need it as a health precaution. That it's a practice based on a certain calculation in their minds, a certain equation. Equation is no longer valid. The practice is no longer valid. Kosher was to protect us from trichinosis or whatever. I don't need to follow these things to protect myself from trichinosis. If there are mitzvahs have a reason, then when the reasoning in our mind changes, then the practice changes. No mitzvahs can change for us. What drives that home is the super rational mitzvahs, which is this. It's etched in stone. There's nothing you can do about it. When it comes to stealing, and I'm sitting, God forbid, I'm sitting in my office, and I think my boss really cheated me. He gypped me out of the bonus that I really needed, and now I have a chance to steal from the company, and I think I'm not going to get caught. Even though I'm a really moral person, I never would steal from someone. This is a little different. Because stealing, there's a point we don't. It's wrong to take someone else's property without their permission. And that's usually this case. I think it's right. If it's I can't take someone else's property without permission because God said I can't. Unless Jewish law says that in this case it's okay, it's not okay. Even if I come up with all my rationalizations. What drives that home to us in the spectrum of our mitzvahs is the super rational mitzvahs. This is the way it is. And you can't mess around with it. And I think I may have mentioned more recently, I mentioned to someone, so at the risk of repeating myself, there's a piece of Talmud that talks about on Shabbos when they would sit by oil lamps, the Shabbos candles. The Torah says not to Jewish law says not to read by the lamp because you may get engrossed in what you're reading, and then you want to bring the lamp a little closer for the light. You tip over the oil, some oil spills out. That's a problem because you're now speeding up the extinguishing the light. You're not supposed to take out any of the oil of a lamp on Shabbos. So the Talmud tells us that the way it is number one, it says don't read by a lamp. Then the Talmud goes further and quotes a rabbi. It says don't read by a lamp because you might. And then the Talmud goes further and says one of the greats, Rabbi Shmuel, in the Talmud, he read by a lamp because he figured he's Rabbi Shmuel, he's not going to forget. And ultimately he forgot and he violated. And the commentators will say it's trying to show us the difference between just stating a law without reason, and we want reasons. But once you have the reason, the mind plays games. Say that reason doesn't apply to me. So the idea of a chok, the super rational mitzvahs, means it's etched in stone. And when it comes to Torah, even the rational mitzvahs should be etched in stone. It's if I'm not allowed to do it, I'm not allowed to do that. Even if I come up with all the calculations, if I have the calculations, so I got to go see if Jewish law agrees with me. Furthermore, you must continue to pursue them and their study even once you think that you have mastered them. Never think that you are free to forsake their study in favor of the study of other cultures or religions. I am God, your God, whose authority you accepted unconditionally. You must therefore obey my rules as well as my ordinances. And now we'll go to 5. You must even safeguard the details of my rules and my ordinances that are not explicitly mentioned here, but which will be taught you orally, all of which a man must do in order to live by them eternally in the afterlife. I, being God, may be relied upon to fulfill my promise regarding this reward. Okay, so this verse of these are mitzvahs which you should do to live by them is it's a phrase that gets a lot of attention. First of all, I think what they're kind of insinuating is to live by them. People do mitzvahs and they don't live. Doesn't always work. So live by them here must mean more the soul life. It's not saying that necessarily that it's talking about physical life. So this is one place where the Torah talks is even though Torah doesn't talk about spiritual post-human life. Here's ideas that there is something beyond the human life, because it doesn't seem from the flow of this that this is talking about human life. But if you want to talk human life, this is the source in Torah for setting aside Torah rules in order to save a life. So if we have a Shabbos practices or Shabbos observances, and there's certain things we don't do on Shabbos, and now in order to save a life, or if not at least if a person is in danger, and I'm not a doctor, so I can't know exactly what's going to save a life, but it's something that seems like it might have be part of grievous injury. Set aside Shabbos, normal Shabbos rules, and I do it. Why? Because the Torah says, "V'chai b'hem," you should live by them, and as the Talmud says, not to die by them. Which is the reason that if, God forbid, we were ever threatened with our lives and said, "Go eat a cheeseburger, or go do this violation," we're supposed to, and we're supposed to, not only allowed, we're supposed to do what the coercing person is telling us to do in order to save our lives, because it's a positive commandment. We should live by them. Now there are 3 exceptions to that, which we discussed. It's not relevant here, but there are 3 different situations where the Torah makes an exception for that even at the pain of death, which would be for idolatry or for murder, or for some of these sexual immoralities we're going to talk about. Okay. Let's take a look at Chassidic insights in order to live by them. This phrase can also be read in order to imbue them with life force. It's not only to live by them, it's to give life by them. We enliven through mitzvahs. How do we enliven through mitzvahs? This implies that not only do God's commandments enhance our lives, but by observing them, we bring them to life. What does that mean? For example, even the most meticulously crafted tefillin cannot accomplish their purpose, thereby affecting a positive change in reality until a Jewish man wears them. When you have a Shabbos candle, it's all set up Friday, and you have a match. Say, I'm ready for Shabbos. You are ready for Shabbos. But it's a candle. It's just a candle. and it's just it's a candlestick and a wax candle and a match. Those are kind of mundane things until a woman or a man, but usually the woman takes that match, lights it, and makes a bracha, makes a blessing, and lights the candle, or lights the candle and makes a bracha. Then it becomes a holy article. We have enlivened it. We've brought holiness into the world. So, in this sense, what the verse is telling us, if we want to read it that way, is not only that we should live as we do mitzvahs, but also that we bring life through the mitzvahs. Some authorities say it means that we should do our mitzvahs with life, with enthusiasm. In other words, infuse enthusiasm into our mitzvahs, which is not what he's saying here. Or it's the idea of more of a mystical ideas that we are drawing divine life, divine energy into a mitzvah. That candle is transformed spiritually, is now not just a candle, it's a Shabbos candle. It's a Shabbos candle because you lit it to make a blessing, and now it's alive in a different way. Thus, we bring God's plan to fruition through fulfilling his commandments. Of course, in order to enliven God's commandments, we must ourselves be alive, healthy, strong. Okay, so he brings the other one, happy, enthusiastic, and optimistic. Okay. So now, let's do 5. The other one, inner dimensions. This is a little bit more Kabbalistic. On the right side of 139. Which commandments do in order to live by them. This phrase can be read, for you will thus make them into the man, and through them enliven me, God. What does that mean? The way the Kabbalah is trying to describe lofty divine concepts for the human mind. It's very, there's a chasm there. So one of the things that the way that Kabbalah describes this is it tries to describe it describes human divine attributes as though within like the frame of a human body, because we can relate to that. And the language of Kabbalah, that's the primordial human. In other words, God's not a human, God doesn't have a body, but we can start to understand, to conceptualize our intellect. Okay, so God has intellect. Our functions, our hands, we're a mirror, and the more we understand ourselves, we can understand God, and the more we understand God, we can understand ourselves. But there's this idea, this Kabbalistic notion is called Adam Kadmon, the primordial person. So that's what he's talking about here. When we do function, when we perform mitzvahs, what we're doing is we're contributing, we're building that godly structure. God created a metaphysical structure, and the metaphysical structure, a lot of it is in potential, but we draw God into it. So therefore, what he's saying is like this. Let's look at Kabbalistic terminology. This means that when we perform God's commandments, we draw divine energy into them. It's like we said in the earlier one. Tefillin, a mezuzah, a Shabbos candle, it's a dead part of the system until we do the mitzvah. Then we draw divine life into it. So all of those ideas, we say they're in the language of Jewish spirituality. The human being has 248 limbs, and there are 248 positive commandments, and there are 365 different blood vessels and sinews, and there's 365 negatives. In other words, it's all in the form of the human, and we're building the human as we go through our day, either by doing something or by refraining from doing something. Inasmuch as the commandments are configured in human form, and okay, so they bring it up here. The parts of Zeir Ampin, I'm not going to get into it now, but parts of means it's an organism, a mystical organism within the structure. And this is within God's emotive attributes. So the 248 active commandments being rooted in the limbs of this parts of this organism, and the 365 restrictive commandments being rooted in its nerves and sinews. Our performance of these commandments brings life force into this matrix of divine forces through which God's attributes are manifest in the world. Okay. Let's go a little bit more. Up to verse 6. It says, no man or woman may come near to any of his or her close relatives listed below to uncover their nakedness, meaning to fornicate with them. So Torah lists of, it's telling us that there's a part of life which can get wild and unbridled. I mean, there are a number of them, but sexuality is a natural one where someone's not trying to hurt anybody. Someone's not trying to be evil, but they want to do what feels good. So there is, we want to be able to channel that in a holy direction. Now, in our way of thinking, with close family, I think we're socialized to kind of see them as, not to see close family in that way. The Torah, especially given what was going on in those days, says that can change. And then we have readily available sexuality because it's close family. We live together. And we have to be extra careful with that. So it says like this. Even though the following prohibitions are couched only as addressing men, they are equally pertinent where applicable to women. As stated, I am God who can be relied upon to reward you for observing them. You must not uncover the nakedness of your father, which means his wife, even if she's not your mother, nor uncover the nakedness of your mother, even if she's not your father's wife. In either case, she is, because in that case, it would be also a married person. It's in either case, she is in this regard your mother. You must therefore not uncover your nakedness. So a child is not allowed to have sexual relations with a parent, which to us is bizarre and illegal, but it's to have, aside from people who I think are probably have severe mental issues, that they would do that today, but it wasn't as out of bounds a few thousand years ago. And the main thing is that there was readily available, especially if it's a parent and child, when the parent has control. Therefore, you must not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife, even if your father has died. Still consider your father's nakedness. So here's an important thing. One of the things it says in Torah is, if a person says, it's my stepmom, that's wife. Of course, it's decency. But now he's dead. What's wrong with it? We're not related. But one of the things is, in our minds, if this person is my stepmom, she should be out of bounds no matter what changes in on the ground. It's just, there's no way I can be with her. Not to think, well, if things change, maybe because I like her or I'm attracted. So for these closer relationships, even if it was someone married to someone close, which we're going to see some of those, even if that person dies, in other words, the relationship has ended, we don't want that in the back of the mind, even while the person is alive. Regarding the nakedness of your sister, 9, page 140. Even if she's only your half sister, being your father's daughter but not your mother's, or your mother's daughter but not your father's, and even if she's the offspring of a forbidden marriage, whether the woman she's born to is allowed to remain in the house as your father's wife, or the woman she's born to must be sent out of the house. In other words, this was a paramour. You must not uncover the nakedness of any such sister. The prohibition against fornication with your father's daughter applies even to a daughter born to a woman your father had raped or seduced. There is this firewall. They can't have any relation. Let's take a closer look at the bottom of 140. The offspring of a forbidden marriage. It is of course forbidden for a couple to marry if they're not allowed to have marital relations. However, if they marry nonetheless, the status of their marriage and the offspring resulting from their union depends on the severity of their prohibition against their conducting marital relations. If relations are punishable by excision, the marriage has no validity. It's considered non-existent, and no divorce is required to permit marriage to others. The offspring of such a union is considered illegitimate. Someone says, I feel terrible, but I grew up in the mountains. Whatever. My sister and I, we married and put up a chuppah, and I read in the English, and I was able to put together a ketubah, and we're married. Got a couple of witnesses. It means nothing. The marriage, there's no need for divorce because I think it can't take hold. That's that type of marriage. The different categories. If relations are not punishable by excision, marriage is considered valid but illegal. The couple must divorce, and marriage with others is not permitted until they do so. The offspring of such marriage is, however, considered legitimate. So if a divorcee is not supposed to marry a Kohen, and they do, so say, you're not supposed to, but it's still a marriage. Okay. As an example. Number 10. Regarding the nakedness of your son by rape or seduction's daughter, or your daughter by rape or seduction's daughter, you must not uncover the nakedness, for even though their parents were not conceived by you in marriage, they're still considered your own nakedness, meaning your close relatives. Similarly, you may not fornicate with your daughter by rape or seduction. Number 11. Regarding the nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, only if she is born to your father. In other words, the offspring of a union that does not make her a Gentile. She is father's wife's daughter. Is she considered? One second, why are they? Daughter born of a non-Jewish bondwoman, and not considered incest, despite the fact that the bondwoman is considered partially Jewish because she is obligated to keep more commandments than other non-Jews. Certainly, then you're not considered related to your father's daughter born of a total non-Jewish. Therefore, relations such as sister, though forbidden, is also not considered incest because there's the soul type is different. We don't have this idea of a bondwoman anymore. You must not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister, even if she is only your father's half-sister on either side. She is a close relative of your father. You must not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, even if she's only your mother's half-sister on either side, for she is a close relative of your mother. You must not, so in other words, someone's not, this is an ant in that way. You must not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. You must not approach his wife, fornicate with her. She's your aunt. This prohibition only applies if your uncle is your father's full paternal brother, not if she's only your father's maternal brother. Okay, so even an aunt by marriage. You must not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law, but only if she's your son's legal wife. But must you not uncover her nakedness? Fornication with her is not considered incest if you raped her, or if she's non-Jewish, non-Jewish. Obviously, this is all forbidden stuff. But the question is whether it rises to this. You must not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife, which is your brother's nakedness. So it's a sister-in-law. Must not uncover the nakedness of a woman or her daughter, whether or not she be your daughter also, or if you're ever married to the other one of them. You must not take in marriage her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They are close relatives. Relations with them are forbidden. Therefore, such a union is the counsel of your evil inclination. If a woman is not your legal wife, but you raped or seduced her, you're permitted to marry her mother or daughter, provided, of course, the daughter is not also your daughter. Which is also, it's kind of creepy in our way of thinking, but it's not this biblical idea of incest. You must not take a woman and her sister in marriage. In other words, you can't marry both of them in the days when you can have polygamy. Thus making them rivals, whether you're married to them both at the same time or one after the other, to uncover the nakedness of one upon the other. in the first one's lifetime. Thus, even if you divorce your wife, you may not marry her sister as long as her sister, your ex-wife, is alive. After your ex-wife dies, however, you may marry her sister. So marrying a wife's sister is permissible if the wife dies. You must not approach a woman in order to uncover her nakedness during her period of menstrual separation on account of her attendant ritual defilement. That's what we call nida today. You must not lie carnally with your neighbor's fellow Israelite's wife, thereby causing yourself to become spiritually defiled by her. The idea of an affair with a married woman, that's a very severe biblical issue. An affair with someone who's not married is also bad, but at the levels of severity. You must not give any of your offspring to the priests of idolatry in order for them to pass the child bear through the two fires that were set up for the worship of the deity Melech. This was something that was common, a common idolatry at the time of the Torah. It's interesting that this gets thrown into it, and our commentaries tell us that there was a tremendous impulse. Yes, Yolanda, I'm sorry, I missed that. I didn't see you raise your hand.
When was this written? Because of being after Rachel.
After what?
Rachel and Leah.
Right. So this is after Rachel and Leah. They would not have been able to have Rachel and Leah. And there's a lot of discussion as to how Jacob, even though the Torah was not given yet, we're told that Jacob and our patriarchs and matriarchs were sensitive to Torah laws even before they were given. But in the dry answer is this was the Torah was given. These laws were put down hundreds of years after Jacob.
Thanks.
Okay. Good catch. Okay. And set up for the worship of the deity Molech, which was the Talmud tells us was a very an overwhelming impulse for the Jewish people in a way that we really can't even understand. But it does compare it to the sexual drive. You must not profane the name of your God in the eyes of other peoples who are worshiping Molech. I am God, and may be relied upon to punish you for doing this. Okay, so we're up to the seventh reading. We'll leave it for here. I am going to be in Poland, God willing, next Tuesday with I think I mentioned this, my father-in-law's 90th birthday. But with God willing, the Tuesday afterwards, we will reconvene. If there are any questions, otherwise, wish you all a good week, and a week when we hear good news, better news.
Thank you. I'll probably see you before then, but have safe travels.
Yes.
God willing, I'll see you. But
Have a great
thank you.
Thank you.